Imagine for a second that you're sitting in a doctor's office and you've just been told you have an untreatable, devastating genetic condition.
Just a completely crushing diagnosis.
Right. And then suddenly, science discovers a way to not just, treat it, but entirely rewrite the natural history of the disease.
It's the kind of thing that sounds like science fiction.
It really does, but it's real. And welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a true masterclass in modern medicine, the story of spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA.
Yeah, and we are drawing our insights today from a really comprehensive clinical review. It's from Continuum, Lifelong Learning in Neurology.
Authored by Dr. Mariam Ascoui and Dr. Laurent Servais.
Right, two leading experts. And they basically map out a landscape that has shifted so radically in just the last decade that honestly, medical textbooks are being rewritten right now, in real time.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack how SMA went from being the most common genetic cause of infant mortality, which is just a heavy, heavy reality, to this showcase for the breathtaking power of modern therapeutics.
Because we're not just looking at cool pharmacology here.
No, exactly. We're looking at what happens when you fundamentally alter a disease. You force the medical community to rethink how we even measure the value of a human life or, capability.
Yeah, and to really appreciate the magnitude of these breakthroughs, you have to understand the blueprint of the disease first.
The molecular foundation.
Right, so at its core, SMA is caused by the degeneration of anterior horn cells. These are motor neurons in the spinal cord and brainstem.
And this happens because of a missing or mutated gene.
Russ, the SMN1 gene on chromosome 5q. In about 95% of cases, it's just a homozygous deletion. And that gene is responsible for producing the survival motor neuron protein.
The SMN protein.
Exactly.
Well, what's wild to me is, SMA is rare. It affects roughly 1 in 10,000 live births, but the carrier frequency is surprisingly high.
Oh, very high.
Up to 1 in 50 people in some populations are walking around carrying one mutated allele, completely asymptomatic.
Which is staggering when you think about it. But the real paradox here, the biological quirk that makes all of these treatments possible, is SMN2.
Okay, so let me try an analogy here to help you, the listener, visualize this. If the SM1 gene is your body's main factory for this vital protein,
Right.
Is the SMN2 gene basically like a faulty backup generator?
That is the perfect analogy, yes. Humans have this nearly identical paralog gene, SMN2, but the catch is it has this tiny typo, a single nucleotide substitution.
It's just one letter in the DNA.
Yeah, a C to a T transition in exon 7. And that single typo creates a weak splice site. So when the body tries to read the instructions, it frequently skips exon 7 entirely.
So the protein comes out truncated.
And rapidly degraded, it's useless. But SMN2 manages to produce maybe 10 to 15% functional full-length protein.
So it's a backup generator, but it barely works.
Exactly. And this introduces the whole dose-dependent nature of the disease. The severity of your SMA is essentially an inverse reflection of how many copies of that backup generator you happen to inherit.
Right, because if a baby inherits only 1 or 2 copies of SMN2, they're facing profound, severe deficits.
But if they have 3, 4, or maybe 5 copies, they produce enough of that aggregate protein to push the symptoms back by years, sometimes into adulthood.
It's like a genetic dial for severity. But wait, I have a question about the pathology itself.
Sure.
If this SMN protein is expressed in all cells every tissue in the body needs it for basic cellular function. Why do only the motor neurons die off? Why aren't we seeing, liver failure or heart collapse?
That is the crucial question. And it comes down to the extreme architectural demands of the motor neuron.
Okay.
These are some of the largest cells in the entire human body. I mean, a single motor neuron can have its cell body in your lower back, your lumbar spine.
Yeah.
And its axon can extend a full meter down your leg to innervate a muscle in your foot.
Wow. A single cell.
A single cell. So maintaining that massive structure and facilitating all the transport along that axon, it requires relentless metabolic energy.
So while a liver cell might do just fine on that 15% backup protein,
the motor neuron simply cannot. It starves. The axon retracts and the cell dies. And once that neuron is gone, the muscle it was connected to loses its support and you get rapid secondary muscle atrophy.
Which brings us to the historical reality of what this actually looked like for patients before these miracle drugs existed. Neurologists used to classify SMA into types 0 through 4.
Right, purely based on that SMN2 dial and the physical milestones the patient could hit.
And types 0 and 1 are they're devastating.
They really are. These babies are symptomatic right at birth or within a few months. Profound hypotonia, which is that severe floppiness.
Right.
And arflexia, Without aggressive respiratory and nutritional support, they never even learned to sit up. And historically, the mortality rate was incredibly high, usually before age 2.
And then the spectrum moves to type 2, where kids can sit independently, but they never walk. Type 3, they learn to walk, but often lose the ability later on.
And type 4 is the adult onset version, which is just slow, progressive weakness.
But the clinical signs doctors look for are so specific. It's not just general weakness. Like, the review mentions the Gowler's sign.
Yeah, where a child uses their hands to basically walk up their own legs just to stand up from the floor because their proximal muscles are so weak.
And the loss of reflexes follows this fascinating, totally predictable pattern. The sources say it goes proximal to distal, lower limbs to upper limbs.
Exactly. The patellar reflex, the knee-jerk reaction, is almost always the very first thing to disappear.
It's like watching a systematic shutdown of the nervous system.
It is. And because motor neurons don't regenerate, once they're gone, they're gone. Which is why establishing this baseline is so important for the listener to understand the stakes of what comes next.
The race against time.
Exactly. Time is motor neurons. That is the defining mantra in SMA care right now.
Which brings us to the newborn screening revolution. Because if you wait until the baby looks floppy, you're too late, right?
Way too late. The clinical review shows that treatment efficacy drops off a cliff once symptomatic weakness starts.
And this leads to my favorite aha moment in the whole review, the biomarker. Phosphorylated neurofilaments, or PNFH.
Yeah, this is brilliant science.
The data shows that in babies with just 2 copies of SMN2, their blood levels of PNFH spike dramatically right at birth, before they show a single symptom.
Because those neurofilaments are the structural scaffolding of the axon. When the motor neuron starts to die, that scaffolding breaks apart and spills into the blood.
See, seeing that spike tells doctors, hey, the house is already on fire. Even if there's no smoke visible on the outside, the damage is happening in the dark.
Exactly, which is why universal newborn screening is the only way to catch it in time to use these new therapies effectively.
And to make this real for you listening, we have to talk about case 12-2 from the source text.
Oh, this case is incredible.
It's a 22-day-old baby boy, identified through a newborn blood spot screen. He only had 2 copies of SMN2, meaning he was destined for severe type 1 SMA.
The worst trajectory.
Right. But because they caught it, he got intravenous gene therapy at just 43 days old. And by 11 months, he was walking independently.
Which historically is a miracle. A type 1 patient walking at 11 months is unheard of.
But, and this is an important nuance, the authors are very careful not to paint this as a perfect fairy tale.
Right.
Because even treated that early, this same boy started showing proximal muscle weakness by age 3. Why does that happen if he got the gene replacement?
Well, it's what we call a somatic mismatch.
Okay, what does that mean?
So the gene therapy rescues a fixed pool of motor neurons when he's a tiny infant. But as that child grows into a 3-year-old, his muscle mass expands exponentially.
Oh, so the physical demands go way up.
Exactly. The physiological demand on that previously damaged fixed pool of motor neurons just outpaces their capacity.
Right.
We've radically modified the disease, but we haven't completely cured the underlying vulnerability.
That makes total sense. The intervention changes the trajectory, but the deficit is still kind of there under stress.
Yes. And there's another warning the experts raise about newborn screening. About 5% of patients are what's called compound heterozygotes.
Right, meaning they have a whole gene deletion on one side, but just a tiny point mutation on the other.
And standard screening often misses that tiny point mutation. So the family gets a clean bill of health, and then months later, the developmental delays start.
And they lose that critical early treatment window.
It's an agonizing delay. Clinicians really have to trust what they see in front of them if a baby starts showing weakness, even if the newborn screen was negative.
Okay, so let's dive into the medical marvels themselves. The therapeutic arsenal. The big 3, FDA-approved therapies that changed everything.
Right, let's start with nusinersen, approved in 2016. This is an antisense oligonucleotide.
Meaning it doesn't replace the missing SMN1 gene. It actually forces the faulty backup generator, SMN2, to work better.
Exactly. It forces the spliceosome to include that missing exon 7, so the body produces more functional protein.
But because it can't cross the blood-brain barrier easily, it has to be given via a spinal tap-in intrathecal injection every 4 months. Forever.
Which is a heavy burden, but it works. Then in 2019, we get onisimnogene abeparvovec.
Try saying that 3 times fast.
Right. But this one is literal gene replacement for kids under 2. It's a viral vector, AAV9, given through an IV, It delivers a working copy of the SMN1 gene directly to the motor neurons.
One single infusion. It's incredible. And then the third one, approved in 2020, is risdiplam.
Which is a daily oral liquid. You just drink it. And like nusinersen, it modifies the SMN2 splicing, but it works systemically all over the body.
Okay, so here's my challenge for you, and I'm sure listeners are thinking this too. Let's use a plumber analogy.
Okay, let's hear it.
If I have a broken pipe, I want the plumber to install a totally new pipe, that's the gene replacement, but I also want him to put a bucket underneath to catch any drips. That's the SMN2 modifiers.
Right.
Why aren't doctors just giving patients all three drugs at the same time for a super cure?
It's a really logical question. The theory makes sense, but the clinical reality requires major restraint. The sources are very clear on this. Right now, there is zero robust evidence that combining these therapies improves functional motor outcomes.
Wow, really? None.
None. But what it does do is add astronomical financial costs, massive burdens to the patient, and most importantly, it compounds the risk of severe side effects.
Like what kind of side effects?
Well, the gene therapy carries risks of severe liver toxicity. The other drugs carry risks of thrombocytopenia, which is a drop in blood platelets. If you stack the drugs, you stack the toxicities without a proven benefit.
So you can't just throw the whole kitchen sink at the biology and hope for the best.
Exactly. You have to be precise.
Which transitions perfectly into the final major theme of our deep dive. How do we actually define success for these patients now? Because traditional benchmarks aren't working anymore.
Right. Historically, doctors relied on the World Health Organization motor milestones. Can they sit? Can they walk?
But those are blunt instruments, especially for older patients. And I eagerly want to share case 12.3 from the text because it blew my mind.
Yes, the teacup case.
A teacup case. Okay, so this is a 25-year-old woman with type 2 SMA. She's been in a wheelchair since childhood. She starts taking risdiplam, that daily oral medication.
Right.
After a full year, they test her on the standard clinical scale, the Hammersmith scale, and her score hadn't improved by a single point.
On paper, the drug failed.
On paper, yeah, but to the patient, the treatment was completely transformative.
She gained stamina.
Exactly. She could endure long university lectures. She regained the strength to chew uncooked vegetables. She could do her needlepoint hobbies again. And crucially, this is the detail I love, she gained enough microscopic upper arm strength to drink from a cup filled with a greater volume of tea.
It's such a profound shift in how we think about medicine. The goal isn't just to move an arbitrary number on a chart. It's to improve the patient's actual daily participation in life.
Drinking a full cup of tea without help? The Hammersmith scale doesn't measure that, but to her, it's autonomy.
Exactly. And this is why the review advocates so strongly for continuous wearable sensors in the future. To catch these micro improvements in the patient's actual home environment, not just in a sterile clinic every 6 months.
And we should definitely note that even with these miracle drugs, the multidisciplinary clinic is still the absolute cornerstone of care.
Oh, 100%. A splicing modifier drug is not going to fix established scoliosis.
Right.
It doesn't replace the need for a BiPAP machine to help with breathing at night, or the orthopedic surgeon, or the nutritionist.
The drugs keep the neurons alive, but the team sustains the actual quality of life.
Perfectly said.
So, just to recap the journey for you listening, we've gone from understanding the genetic factory of SMN1 and 2 to the absolute race against time with newborn screening. We looked at the trio of groundbreaking treatments, the ASOs, the gene therapies, and finally, this beautiful shift toward measuring real-world quality of life over just clinical scores.
It is staggering scientific momentum. But, we want to leave you with one final concept from the literature to really mull over.
Yeah.
The authors talk about observing the new natural history of SMA. Because these remarkable therapies are keeping patients alive and active far longer than ever before, we are basically watching medical evolution happen in real time.
You've created a generation of new survivors.
Exactly. We now have people maturing into older adulthood with a highly modified chronic condition that the medical world has never actually seen mature before.
Because a decade ago, they wouldn't have survived childhood.
Right. So the profound question for society now is, how will our physical infrastructure, our orthopedic strategies, and our long-term healthcare systems adapt to support this entirely new population of aging adults?
It's an incredible problem to have, but it is a massive challenge we have to face. We solved the genetic typo, but now we have to build the world for the survivors.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It's been fascinating. We will catch you next time.